And with us right now, we have Heather Dominick. And Heather, you are the founder of A Course in Business Miracles, which is on the web at businessmiracles.com. I should also point out that you're also a podcast host, and your podcast is called Business Miracles. So anyone who's listening to us right now, you just pull up your app and you go find Business Miracles. And if you like what you hear about Heather, well, you can hear a lot more. Heather, thank you so much for joining us.
I'm so happy to be here. Thank you so much, Josh.
So you work in your work with A Course of Business Miracles, you work with what you call highly sensitive entrepreneurs. And so I think probably the best place to start is go ahead and define who a highly sensitive entrepreneur is.
Right, exactly. What is that? So first of all, the term highly sensitive is not a term coined by me, but comes from Dr. Elaine Aron, who is the founding researcher on the highly sensitive person. And starting with her research from the early 1990s, she was really able to determine that there are 20% of us who are born into the world highly sensitive. And what that means is that your nervous system is wired to take in stimulation at a much higher degree than someone who's not highly sensitive. So where my work comes in is to support the person who is highly sensitive, who feels called to be self-employed, and how to go about marketing, selling, and operations in a way that really works for you and supports how your nervous system is wired rather than work against it.
So if someone is highly sensitive, like what might they feel? So they would go, oh my gosh, I'm highly sensitive.
Yes, absolutely. So there are 12 top HSE shadows and 12 top HSE strengths that I've identified through my work. So I'll speak to just a few of those. So a top HSE shadow is absolutely overwhelm. So if you really take a moment to consider that your nervous system takes in stimulation at a much higher degree, then it kind of makes sense that things like sight, sounds, smells, even any type of energy will really have a greater impact on you than someone who is not highly sensitive. And so then that also in our information age includes information. And then what I'll say is one of the top HSE strengths is that we are very intuitive. So that's when your finely tuned nervous system is really working for you. So you're really able to intuit, again, using all 5, 6 senses to really be able to have a sense of, most importantly, what another person needs. And that really comes in handy when you're a service-based business owner.
Do you think that when you share that definition, pretty much everybody goes, oh, well, that's me? I mean, everybody gets overwhelmed from overstimulation.
Right. Well, what's really interesting is that, of course, there's absolutely a lot of overwhelm these days, right? Again, we're living in a very, high tech, high information age. However, a person who's highly sensitive, something that is maybe slightly overwhelming to someone who is not highly sensitive will absolutely bowl a person over who is highly sensitive. So you can think of something like even eating in a loud restaurant is really difficult for a highly sensitive and not enjoyable. Same thing for maybe, somewhere where there's a lot of external stimulation, like smells of country, summer, fair, maybe, or anything else that you can possibly think of along those lines. So it's not about yes or no, but it's about the degree up on the spectrum.
Yeah, I can see that. I have to think that it's like way more than 20%. That, I think, and it might be just more situational. I'll give you a great example. So recently, I was at the Apple store and at Florida Mall here in Orlando, and it was just, it's really interesting. I mean, it's loud and ongoing, just a cacophony of just like chatter all over. And it was really interesting because while I was there, I was getting some some stuff taken care of for my phone and my computer. So I said, well, let me try the new AirPod Pros. And so, okay, so they bring them out, and I've got them right here. I'm holding right now. And so I pop them in. And what's interesting about these is they're noise canceling. And I've really never used noise canceling headphones before. But it was amazing that, all of a sudden it's like all that, was just all of a sudden quiet. And
Yes.
I'm like, oh my gosh, like I didn't realize, kind of that little bit of anxiety that I was feeling.
Right.
It wasn't really noticeable, but I just felt it. Like, oh my gosh,
Right.
so much commotion around me. But I pop them in and I'm like, oh my gosh, it's like my moment of Zen. And all of a sudden now I'm just looking at all of these people, just like this, hundreds of people, just blah, 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 and they're just silent. And I'm like, it was almost like I was the observer now. It's like watching this on a screen. And it was honestly just like that little experience right there. I'm like,
Yes.
I can see a huge difference in being able to rise above, these things that might overwhelm us in our daily life.
Right, for sure. Well, I have a few thoughts to share about your awesome story.
Yeah.
So one, noise canceling headphones are like my best friend.
Wow.
So I have a few different pairs for various occasions. So that's number one. Number two, although I hate to admit it, I literally almost passed out in an Apple store. Like they had to bring me a chair and a glass of water.
Yeah.
And three, I don't know, Josh, you might be highly sensitive.
I might be. My wife is, it's funny. My wife is hearing impaired. So I told her, I said, man, you don't know what a gift you have. It's like when you just hear this nonstop, depending on where you are. It's, so at the Apple store, then I had to walk through the mall and I popped in and listened to some angsty Radiohead, while I was walking through the mall. And again, just silence other than like my soundtrack to this movie that I was observing. And,
Sure.
it was really, it was almost meditative.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, the other part about your story that says perhaps you might be highly sensitive is your attention to detail, right? So not everyone is going to take that in, and meaning one, they might not have that kind of overstimulation experience, and two, not necessarily then the ability that once the noise canceling headphones are in to really be able to observe the dropping away of the stimulation, the interpretation of the experience like a movie. Again, sounds kind of like a highly sensitive moment to me.
Yeah, could be. Which is, and I think, and it may be, so someone who has those traits, we assume that everybody feels that way, but maybe they don't. I mean, I don't know. I was like, and I go to, we go to theme parks all the time and stuff, but like you're in it. I don't know. So one other thing I wanted to talk about is you hear another term thrown around a bit. And I read a book on this some time ago because I had a really great conversation with a friend about this. And that is being an empath. And so, and it's interesting. And I know that absolutely kind of runs within me. And I'll tell you, it's really interesting how it manifests is that, for example, and I'll give you a couple of examples. So when I'm having a conversation with somebody, like I really like absorb myself into that conversation. Like I really, just give them as I'm not perfect at this because there's sometimes I truly get distracted, but I really try to be like 100% like in the moment with them, rather than, thinking about what I'm going to be saying next. And a part of that was going through improv school was actually really good for this, about being in the moment. But I'll tell you, being naturally extroverted, I absolutely like when I'm at like a conference or something like that. Oh, mama. When I've been doing that for a few hours, it's taxing. And I'll tell you, it's really interesting. Where I especially notice this is if I encounter people, and I've actually read articles about this, where you encounter someone, not necessarily a difficult person, but anyone who comes across as very inauthentic it's very painful for some reason for me. Like if I can tell that like I'm not connecting with them and like they're just kind of in this robot pitch mode, I'm like, like you're not giving me the real you, and that's really frustrating for me. Like
Yeah.
tell me what's going on. Tell me what's going on
Yeah,
here.
I'm definitely hearing, highly sensitive strengths. So
Sure.
another one of our HSE strengths is that we are deep listeners. So that's what I hear you describing, where you really tune into a person. And also another of our HSE strengths is that we are empathic by nature. And really the difference between a highly sensitive and an empath is just where you fall on that energetic spectrum.
Yeah.
So highly sensitive has empathic qualities, but might not be, really to the extreme end of the spectrum like an empath, who can, really find it difficult to operate in the world. And then also another of our HSE strengths is that we have a deep belief in justice. So that in authenticity really registers, right? If you take those strengths and you think like, again, we're deep listeners, we're also deep thinkers and deep feelers, two of our additional HSE strengths. And you pair that again with the empathic ability, with a deep belief in justice, and inauthenticity is difficult. Most highly sensitives really prefer to engage authentically, more intimately than say, amongst large crowds with a lot of surface connection and surface conversation. Again, it's what makes us really good at what we do as service-based entrepreneurs.
So Heather, I kind of envision you as kind of being Dr. X at the school for the gifted, who have this ability, they've become superhuman in some way. We'll say it like this. So where do you take them?
Well, for sure. Most HSEs, they feel a call to be self-employed again as a service-based business owner, which really makes sense because again, the way that we're wired, we're so good at being healers, at being coaches, at being creative entrepreneurs. And most of us have not been trained how to really utilize our nervous system so it works for us, but instead we've learned how to really just cope, right? How to try to get by in a world that's designed for what I like to say the other 80%, the non-highly sensitives. So most HSEs, by the time they get to me, they really actually feel like they're the odd one out. They've been denying their authentic self most of their life as an attempt to fit in. They don't want to seem like the weird one who, is really able to interpret a moment like, your Apple store or walk through the mall that you described, or that they can really listen deeply. They can hear beyond what a person is saying. And again, learn how to squash that. So by the time HSEs get to me, they're most likely facing one of the two primary coping mechanisms that I've identified, and that's either pushing or hiding. Pushing is when an HSE can really get done what another 80%er in the world can get done, but it usually comes at a high cost. And a hider is that they feel the call to be self-employed, but they're actually really busy overprotecting themselves and not actually engaging in what needs to get done to move the business forward. So that's where my work comes in. It's a retraining process to learn how to use your nervous system so that it works for you and creating business success rather than against you.
What does that look like?
So it's really an inner and outer approach. So the inner is a lot about redesigning how you react to your nervous system so that it's more of a response. So a lot of the internal work that I teach is about being more proactive rather than often, again, for an HSE who's untrained, they're just reacting. They're reacting at all the stimulation that's coming to them. But there's certain, practices that you can put in place that will support you so that you can be out in the world marketing, you can be having selling conversations and not feeling like you have to defend yourself against the world. And then the outer practices are how to go about marketing and selling in a very different way than the other 80%. So another one of our HSE strengths is that we're very spiritual by nature. So for example, the selling process that I teach is a very deep process that's really about that deep connection that you were describing earlier. And so many of, my members in the Business Miracles community describe the process as a spiritual process. And the feedback that they get from the prospects that they're connecting with is the same. So those are just some examples about how to learn how to go about business differently.
So Heather, you've built up a very large business. I mean, you do 7 figures. How did you how did you just kind of get your first big successes?
Well, I will honestly say my first big success was before I understood that I was highly sensitive,
Mhm.
and nearly absolutely took me out. And I was absolutely in the coping mechanism of pushing the first time that I brought my business across the $1 million mark. And it really led me to a very dark night of the soul where I was really questioning, like, I don't know, like, if this is what this is about, then I'm just not sure it's for me. And through that dark night of the soul, that is when I was led to Dr. Elaine Aron and learned that I was highly sensitive. And because I've always been a teacher that your ideal client is a version of you, once I understood that I was highly sensitive, I started learning that the majority of the women entrepreneurs I was serving at the time were also highly sensitive. And that really showed me that something was very needed here. We had to go about the business differently, or we would really all end up burning out. And that would be such a disservice because so many gifted women, so many gifted entrepreneurs, so much to offer to the world, through the business. And so then I really learned how to go about being in business differently for myself. And so I don't really look at that first crossing of the $1 million mark as a success. I see it as more of like a catapult into now being able to be a solidly sustainable 7-figure mission in a way that really works for me and serves my highly sensitive nature, so that I go through the majority of my days very calm, very grounded, very centered, very service oriented, without that typical entrepreneurial hustle, which I'm just not interested in.
Heather, what are your products or what are your services that you offer?
Yeah, so we're a mentoring company. So we provide mentoring programs because, as I described, this really is very much an inner and an outer process. And it really requires 3 key elements that I've identified, which is community, core practice, and consistency. And all of that absolutely requires a high level of accountability and support. So our mentoring programs are everything from a 6-month program up to year-long programs. And then the year-long program of your choice really just depends on how deep you want to avail yourself in regards to that accountability and support.
So again, I do. I feel like it's like if you're an X-Men, you go to spend some time at the school for the gifted with Dr. X. Well,
Yeah.
that's really wonderful, Heather. I want to thank you so much for joining us. This is really enlightening. And again, you are Heather Dominick. You're the founder and CEO of A Course in Business Miracles, which is on the web at businessmiracles.com. And right now, very easily, you can find Heather's podcast. It's just Business Miracles. You can find that everywhere that you listen to the podcasts.
Great.
Thanks so much, Heather.
Thank you, Josh. I so appreciated this conversation.